injustice in the court system, lack of political rights, disfranchisement. All of these stood as evidence that the South was, in fact, a racially divided part of the country. And that, of course, was also connected with the grinding poverty of the South. Dr. King often talked in his writings about growing up and noting not only the problem of racism, but also the problem of poverty in the South. The fact that you had people who didn't have food to eat, who had poor living quarters and things of that nature. So he learned very early that racial injustice and economic injustice were perennial allies. They were connected in a very real way. And I learned that also growing up in Camden, Alabama, that economic injustice and racial injustice went hand in hand.
You know, when you talk about the system of segregation, I think the most obvious thing that we can point out dealing with Dr. King is that it was the system that eventually killed him through his assassination in Memphis. But now, how did others who challenged that system as Dr. King challenged the system, how did they make out? Dr. King certainly is a high-profile person, and et cetera, but what about the average person during that period, or did the average person challenge the system?
Yes, I think we have to see the civil rights movement as a people movement. And interestingly enough, that's one of the directions that King scholarship is taking today. We feel that so much has been written about Dr. King and his leadership role in the movement. But now we understand that there needs to be an effort to look at the movement as a people's movement, to deal with some of the grassroots leaders and to deal with those people who, the no-name people who were involved. Certainly, it was a people's movement. There's no other way to look at it. And, made up of maids and farmers and janitors and others who risked their jobs and even their lives to participate in the demonstrations and the prayer vigils and the acts of civil disobedience. So there's no question that it was a people's movement. And I think it's really fortunate, it's great that scholars are beginning to take that particular angle instead of discussing the movement, dealing with the movement around one charismatic figure. So I think that's very, very important.
Let's look at the movement during the rest of the period from the perspective of your two books here. That is, the first book giving some idea about Dr. King's background, the next book giving more of a philosophical interpretation of the legacy and et cetera. Let's use the remaining part of that of our time that we have here to talk about those two positions.
Okay.
But what about Dr. King, his background and that kind of information?
Well, I think there's no question that Dr. King was a product of the forces that existed in the South. We have to first take into account the experience of segregation itself. He grew up in Atlanta, Georgia in the 1930s. He was exposed to racial segregation. He says in his writings and his interviews that the swimming pools were segregated, the theaters were segregated, the churches and the schools were segregated. So he was exposed to that situation of non-community. But he was also exposed to a situation of community in the sense that he was embraced by the black church, he was embraced by the extended family in the black community, he was embraced by the larger black community of Atlanta, Georgia, Morehouse College and the other institutions there. So that created a tension within him. So you have an experience of non-community in relationship to white society, but an experience of community when dealing with black society. So that was very, very important in shaping his life. I think we have to take that into account when we're looking at his background. Not only the church, not only in the black church was very, very important because his father was a minister, as you know, at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. His grandfather had pastored that church between 1894 and 1931. He grew up in the black church and was exposed to William Holmes Borders at Wheat Street Baptist Church, some of the other black churches in Atlanta, Georgia, and also the family. King says in his writings that his mother and father were very important, yes, but there were also grandparents in the King homes, aunts, uncles, cousins, and he was exposed to that kind of extended family network which provided a support mechanism very early in his life, and also during those years when he was a civil rights leader. So you take into account the experience of growing up in the South, the black church and the black family, when you talk about his background.
Okay, well, let's look a little deeper into